Right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to another video talking about, politics here in the United States. As always, likes, comments, subscriptions, they always do help, and I greatly appreciate each and every one of them. And I guess I do have a Patreon. I'm going to see if I can remember to put a link to my Twitter somewhere, though there should be one on the channel page. Anyway, so I kind of want to talk a little bit about vice presidential picks and the vice presidency and who to nominate. Because, of course, Biden's pick is going to probably be announced sometime this week, or at the very least leaked in the coming weeks. And it does matter, but not as much as I think a lot of people would expect, because it depends on which state that the VP nominee is from. It depends on what their ideology is, what their experience level is, that sort of thing, as well as a lot of other factors. And which factors should a person consider when trying to choose a vice presidential nominee? I would start by saying that there are a few purposes that a VP is supposed to do on the presidential ticket. And how important that is depends on a lot of things. So let's look at some of the previous vice presidential picks and see what the goals of those picks was to accomplish. So Donald Trump chose Mike Pence as his vice presidential nominee. So why? Why Mike Pence? Why not, say, Bob Corker or say, Doug Ducey or Ted Cruz or someone like that? Well, Donald Trump wanted a few things. He wanted a governor as his vice president. Second, he needed someone with a lot of experience who was a true conservative, right? And who was from a key area in the Electoral College. At least he viewed as a key area in the Electoral College. So he chose Mike Pence, former governor, or I guess at the time he was still governor, but governor of Indiana. Indiana is, of course, a Rust Belt state. Mike Pence is a conservative. Relatively bland, didn't have too many positive headlines, but also not too many negative headlines, minus the whole religious freedom bill controversy that was somewhat made into a big deal. But anyway. And he fit the bill for what Donald Trump wanted to accomplish with his vice presidential pick. Basically say, listen, I chose a conservative. I chose someone with experience who can help guide me. And I balanced the ticket in a lot of ways. So, there. And it worked to an extent. So what about the other side of the aisle? What about Hillary Clinton's vice presidential pick and Tim Kaine? Well, this was an interesting one because both Clinton and Kaine try to portray themselves as reasonably moderate. Whether or not they are is a different story. I'd say Clinton is much more moderate than Kaine. But Kaine had a ton of experience. He was governor of Virginia at one point. He's still, I believe, the junior senator here in Virginia. So he has experience. And technically he counts as a Southerner because he's from Virginia. Yeah, okay. Anyway, just because you're from a southern state don't make you southern. Anyway, how about we go to 2012? Barack Obama kept Joe Biden, of course, and I'll get to that one in just a bit. Mitt Romney chose Paul Ryan. Now, Mitt Romney was from Massachusetts, considered a bit of a more liberal style of Republican. After all, he did implement, quote, Romney Care in Massachusetts, and was known to be somewhat on the moderate end of the Republican Party. So he wanted to choose somebody who was a little bit more conservative than he was. He wanted to choose someone from an important electoral region, Wisconsin. Wanted to choose someone with federal government experience, which Mitt Romney did not have at the time. And Romney also wanted to pick someone who was young and energetic, which Romney definitely was not on the right side of. So, again, balance the ticket out as much as possible. And that's kind of the goal. 2008, Joe Biden was picked as Barack Obama's running mate because Obama wanted someone with experience. He wanted someone who was viewed as a lot more moderate than he was. And he wanted someone who wouldn't upset the apple cart and would basically there was some, the media may have portrayed there as being some racial tones to the Joe Biden pick as well. I don't remember too much, but I do remember hearing some stuff that maybe Biden was picked just as kind of insurance, sort of. But anyway, John McCain went a completely different direction with his vice presidential nominee, Sarah Palin. Romney wanted to highlight that he was a party maverick in a year when Bush was, being too close to Bush was considered it was pretty much the iceberg in your Titanic if you were seen as too close to George Bush. So McCain wanted to double down on the fact that he was seen as a party maverick and wanted to be, as someone who would reach across the aisle and actually be bipartisan. So he wanted to add in some youth, some spice, do something different and show that the Republican Party was not just the party of George Bush. And it backfired horribly. And of course I could go back and back and back, but there are a few things that I keep seeing is that most vice presidential nominees are a means of balancing the ticket, which is basically a fancy way of saying they are there to cover up some of your weaknesses or get at a voter demographic that you can't appeal to, or bridge gaps that may have been, opened up in the party's coalition. So, for example, a hardline conservative Republican president may choose a moderate as their running mate to say, hey, I won't govern as conservative as I ran in the primary. For example, look at who I've chosen as my vice presidential nominee, such and such, a moderate who's worked with so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so from the other party. That's one thing. Another would be geographic diversity on the ticket. Say a Democrat from California picking as their running mate someone from Louisiana or Florida. That's some geographic diversity right there. And it shows, hey, we're trying to build a broad coalition of not just liberal elite voters. We're trying to get at, different groups. Um, there are, of course, exceptions. Bill Clinton chose Al Gore, who was from a neighboring state. Both are very obviously Southern. And Gore, but that said, there was the ideological balancing of the ticket. Gore was a bit more liberal than Bill Clinton was. So there's that. But you can also try to make a splash with your vice presidential pick and pick someone who is there to garner attention and make headlines. For example, 1984, Walter Mondale chose Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate, and it backfired horribly. Similar thing with John McCain picking Sarah Palin. I don't think it has to do with gender. I don't think it does. I think the American voter is smarter than that. But you also need to make sure you're casting a wide net when you look for your vice president, because you need somebody who is going to be competent. You need someone who's going to be capable of being president if the worst case scenario happens, and you need somebody who can work with the Senate, both parties. Because at the end of the day, there is a very good chance that your party could lose the Senate if you controlled it in the first place. So you can't just pick somebody who is an ideological firebrand and who will not budge and will try to impose their will on a Senate which your party may not have a majority in. So it really does matter who you pick in a lot of ways. So let's tie this into today and talk about Joe Biden's vice presidential nominee choice. Now, Biden has said that he wants to pick a non-white woman. Well, the problem is, in terms of the experience that most people consider necessary to be the vice president, the only non-white woman I can think of who, well, okay, no, there's two that I can think of. Yeah, two that I can think of off the top of my head who would have the experience that is considered necessary. And those are Kamala Harris from California, and I believe it's Mazie Hirono from Hawaii. Those are two I can think of off the top of my head. Maybe is she the senior senator now? Yeah, I think so. The senior senator from Nevada. I forget her name, but her. That would make three. That's not a very wide net. It's also not significantly geographically diverse. So that's why a lot of people have been bringing up the names of a few mayors. Mayor Bowser from Washington, D.C., or I forget her name, but Atlanta's mayor. Val Demings from Florida is another I've heard thrown around. But I don't really consider mayors, regardless of party or size of the city to be qualified for the vice presidency. Now you're going to say, well, then what about Donald Trump? He certainly didn't have the qualifications. And by the standard that I'm setting, you're right. Trump didn't really have the qualifications to be president. But then again, you could go through and continue on and tick off other people who probably shouldn't have been president when they assumed office. But then again, that is personal opinion. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. I hope you all enjoyed. See you next time. Take it easy. Bye-bye.